The security camera in courtroom 3B captured something at exactly 9:47. A Dodna would destroy a woman's entire life in less than 8 minutes. Jennifer Parker, a 35-year-old real estate agent who had spent her entire adult life using money to escape consequences, slid a white envelope containing $5,000 in cash across the clerk's desk. What she whispered next would become the most damning piece of evidence in what Judge Judy would later call the most brazen act of courtroom corruption she had witnessed in 35 years on the bench. The footage of those 7 seconds would be viewed over 17 million times in the first 48 hours after the episode aired, shared across every social media platform with captions like "The moment entitlement met justice," and "She tried to bribe Judge Judy's court and instantly regretted it." But here's what makes this story absolutely insane and what turned it into the most viral courtroom moment in television history. Jennifer Parker didn't just attempt to bribe a court official on camera. She didn't just commit a federal felony punishable by 15 years in prison. What Judge Judy uncovered during her investigation was so much worse, so much more extensive that it would trigger a multi-state criminal probe and expose a pattern of corruption that had been going on for years. Before we dive into the complete destruction of the most arrogant criminal ever caught on Judge Judy's show, you need to understand exactly who Jennifer Parker was and why she walked into that courtroom with the kind of confidence that could only come from someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. Jennifer wasn't just another entitled suburban mom who thought the rules didn't apply to her. She was something far more dangerous. She was a woman who had systematically weaponized her wealth and charm to corrupt the legal system itself, leaving a trail of victims who never got justice because she had learned how to buy her way out of accountability. This was a woman who had beaten a D.U. the first charge 3 years earlier through mysterious circumstances that resulted in evidence disappearing. This was a woman who had settled a sexual harassment complaint from a former employee with a cash payment and a non-disclosure agreement that protected her real estate license. This was a woman who had been sued 17 times in her career and somehow managed to win or settle every single case under circumstances that always seemed just a little too convenient, just a little too favorable for someone with her documented history of destructive behavior. The case that brought Jennifer Parker to Judge Judy's courtroom seemed straightforward on the surface, almost boring by daytime television standards. Margaret Chun, a 78-year-old woman who had been a landlord for 40 years, was suing Jennifer for $12,000 in property damage. Jennifer had rented one of Margaret's properties, a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a lease agreement that explicitly prohibited subletting, pets, and unauthorized modifications. Within 6 months, Jennifer had violated every single term of that lease and then some. She had illegally sublet the property to 3 different tenants without Margaret's knowledge or permission, collecting rent from all of them while paying Margaret only her original lease amount. She had allowed those subtenants to keep multiple large dogs that destroyed the hardwood floors, chewed through door frames, and left the entire house reeking of animal waste. She had authorized extensive unauthorized renovations that included knocking down a load-bearing wall, installing fixtures that violated building codes, and painting over original woodwork that had been maintained for decades. When Margaret finally discovered what was happening and tried to evict Jennifer, she returned to find her property destroyed beyond anything she had seen in 4 decades of rental management. Margaret Chun had brought meticulous documentation to court. She had photographs showing every room of her house before Jennifer moved in pristine condition with beautiful original features and well-maintained systems. She had photographs taken after Jennifer's tenancy showing holes in walls, destroyed flooring, broken appliances, ruined fixtures, and evidence of building code violations that would cost thousands to remedy. She had receipts from contractors totaling exactly $12,347 to restore the property to rentable condition. She had copies of the lease agreement Jennifer had signed, with Jennifer's signature clearly visible on every page that outlined the prohibitions Jennifer had violated. She had testimony from neighbors who had witnessed the constant flow of subtenants, the noise complaints, and the obvious neglect of the property. She had everything she needed to win this case easily. And Judge Judy's producers had scheduled it as a quick 15-minute segment because the evidence was so overwhelming, asterisk what nobody knew. What Margaret Cheon herself couldn't have imagined was that Jennifer Parker had spent 3 hours before the court session executing a plan that would turn a simple property damage case into a federal criminal investigation that would dominate news cycles for weeks, asterisk. Jennifer Parker had arrived at the courthouse at 6:30 that morning, a full 3 hours before her scheduled court time. This wasn't nervousness or preparation. This was reconnaissance. She had parked her Mercedes in the visitor lot and spent 20 minutes in her car, applying makeup with the precision of someone preparing for a performance, checking her designer outfit in the mirror, and most importantly, counting the cash she had withdrawn from 3 different ATM machines the night before to avoid triggering any bank reporting requirements, asterisk. $5,000 in $100 bills, neatly stacked and placed in an unmarked white envelope that she tucked into her Prada handbag alongside her fabricated evidence and carefully rehearsed lies. She had done this before, not in Judge Judy's courtroom, but in 3 other civil cases over the past 5 years. A slip of cash to a clerk here, a generous gift to a court administrator there, always accompanied by carefully worded suggestions about making sure the judge saw things from her perspective. It had worked every single time because Jennifer had learned something that most people never figured out. The legal system wasn't just about evidence and arguments. Asterisk, it was about relationships, access, and knowing which people to approach when nobody was watching. Asterisk. David Martinez had been a court clerk for Judge Judy's show for 15 years. He had processed thousands of cases, handled countless litigants, and seen every variety of human behavior that courtroom stress could produce. He had seen people cry, scream, beg, threaten, and collapse under the weight of their own lies. But in all those years, he had never been directly offered a bribe until Jennifer Parker approached his desk at 9:47 a.m. with an envelope and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. David was reviewing case files for the morning session when Jennifer appeared, glancing around the hallway with the calculated casualness of someone checking for witnesses. Asterisk, she started with small talk, asking about how long he had worked there, commenting on how professional everything seemed, complimenting the efficiency of the court system. David had responded with polite but minimal answers, his internal alarm bells already ringing, because experienced court personnel develop an instinct for when someone is working up to something inappropriate. Asterisk. Then Jennifer leaned closer, lowered her voice to barely above a whisper, and said something that David would later repeat word for word in his testimony. Asterisk. She said this was just a misunderstanding between her and an elderly landlord who was confused about the property condition, that she had evidence that would make everything clear, and that she wanted to make sure Judge Judy understood the situation properly from the beginning. David had maintained his professional demeanor, his face showing nothing, but his mind was already racing through the protocol for this exact situation. Asterisk. Then Jennifer slid the envelope across his desk, her perfectly manicured hand leaving it positioned directly in front of him, and she spoke the words that the security camera audio would capture with devastating clarity. She said this was a thank you for his excellent service, that she appreciated people who understood how things really worked, and that maybe he could just make sure her evidence was presented first so the judge could see the full picture before hearing from a confused old woman who probably didn't remember things correctly. Asterisk. David looked down at the envelope, looked back up at Jennifer's expectant face, and said in a clear, steady voice that he could not accept this. Jennifer's smile never wavered. She pushed the envelope closer and said it wasn't a bribe. It was a gift, that nobody needed to know about it, that she was just being generous to someone who worked hard. She actually added that $5,000 was nothing to her, just a small token of appreciation, and that she was sure someone on a clerk's salary could use a little extra money. Asterisk. That last comment, dripping with condescension and contempt for anyone who made less money than she did, was the moment David Martinez made his decision not just to refuse the bribe, but to ensure that Jennifer Parker faced every possible consequence for attempting it. David had given a subtle hand signal to courthouse security, a gesture that Jennifer completely missed because she was too focused on what she thought was her successful corruption of the system. He told Jennifer he needed to process some paperwork and asked her to wait in the hallway. The moment she turned away, David secured the envelope in an evidence bag, contacted his supervisor, and initiated a protocol that would involve courthouse security, the show's legal team, and ultimately Judge Judy herself. Within 15 minutes, everyone who needed to know about the bribery attempt knew about it. Within 30 minutes, the security footage had been reviewed. The audio had been isolated and enhanced, and the decision had been made to let Jennifer Parker walk into that courtroom thinking her plan had worked. Judge Judy had been informed of the situation before she took the bench, and anyone who knew her could have predicted exactly what was about to happen. She wasn't just going to rule against Jennifer Parker. She was going to make an example of her that would echo through legal history and remind every entitled criminal that some judges cannot be bought, intimidated, or manipulated. Jennifer Parker walked into Judge Judy's courtroom at exactly 10:15 a.m. with the kind of confidence that can only come from someone who genuinely believes they have rigged the game in their favor. She had changed from her earlier outfit into an even more expensive ensemble, a tailored navy suit that screamed professional success, pearl earrings that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and shoes that clicked against the courtroom floor with the authoritative sound of someone who had never been told no in any meaningful way. She carried her leather portfolio like a shield, filled with documents she had carefully selected and in some cases fabricated to support her version of events. As she took her position at the defendant's table, she actually made eye contact with David Martinez at the clerk's desk and gave him a subtle smile and nod, a gesture of acknowledgement between co-conspirators that she believed they now were. David's face remained completely neutral, showing nothing of the storm that was about to break over her head. Jennifer had no idea that the envelope she had given him was now sitting in an evidence bag in Judge Judy's chambers. She had no idea that the security footage had been reviewed by multiple people. She had no idea that she wasn't walking into a civil case about property damage anymore. She was walking into a trap that would destroy everything she had spent her entire adult life building. Margaret Chun sat in the plaintiff's chair looking every bit of her 78 years, tired, worried, and carrying the weight of someone who had been financially devastated by someone she had trusted. She wore a simple dress, sensible shoes, and no jewelry except for her wedding ring from a husband who had passed away 5 years earlier. In her lap, she held a folder that contained the evidence of her case. Photographs and receipts organized with the meticulous care of someone who had spent 40 years managing rental properties and documenting everything. When Judge Judy entered the courtroom and everyone rose, Margaret struggled slightly to stand, her arthritis making the movement painful. Jennifer remained perfectly poised, radiating the false confidence of someone who thought they had purchased a favorable outcome. The bailiff called the case Margaret Chun versus Jennifer Parker. Property damage claim in the amount of $12,000. Judge Judy took her seat, arranged her notes with deliberate precision, and looked directly at Jennifer with an expression that experienced viewers of the show would recognize as the calm before an absolutely devastating storm. But Jennifer, blinded by her own arrogance and convinced her bribe had secured her safety, interpreted that look as simple judicial attentiveness. Margaret Chun's testimony was heartbreaking in its simplicity and honesty. She explained that she had been a landlord for 4 decades, that she had always treated her tenants fairly and maintained her properties with pride, and that Jennifer Parker had been the worst tenant she had ever encountered in all those years. Her voice trembled as she described returning to her property after Jennifer's eviction to find destruction that had made her physically ill. She showed photographs that told the story more powerfully than words ever could. Asterisk beautiful hardwood floors that had been maintained for 30 years, now gouged and stained beyond repair. Original crown molding that had survived since the house was built in 1962, now chewed by dogs and ripped from walls. A kitchen that had been spotless, now with broken cabinets, non-functional appliances, and evidence of grease fires that had never been reported. A bathroom where someone had attempted to install a jacuzzi tub without permits or professional help, resulting in water damage that had rotted through subflooring and threatened structural integrity of the entire room. Asterisk Margaret's hands shook as she presented contractor estimates, each one itemized and documented, showing that restoring the property to rentable condition would cost $12,347. She explained that she was on a fixed income, that this property had been her retirement investment, and that Jennifer's actions had not just cost her money, but had violated the trust that made her business possible for 40 years. Asterisk. Judge Judy listened to Margaret's testimony with focused attention, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her complete understanding of property law and landlord-tenant relationships. She examined each photograph carefully, reviewed each receipt thoroughly, and made notes with the precision of someone building an ironclad legal record. Asterisk. Then she turned her attention to Jennifer Parker, and anyone watching could see the temperature in the courtroom drop several degrees. Asterisk. Judge Judy asked Jennifer to explain her version of events, to tell the court why she believed she didn't owe Margaret Chun $12,000 for documented property damage. Jennifer's response was a masterclass in entitled arrogance wrapped in fake victimhood. She claimed that Margaret was exaggerating the damage, that the property had already been in poor condition when she moved in, that Margaret was a confused elderly woman who didn't understand that normal wear and tear was expected in rental properties. Asterisk. She actually used the phrase normal wear and tear to describe holes in walls and destroyed flooring. She suggested that Margaret was trying to take advantage of the court system to get free renovations paid for by someone with deeper pockets. She rolled her eyes when Judge Judy pressed her on specific damages, sighing dramatically as if dealing with someone who simply didn't understand how the real worked. Asterisk. Judge Judy let Jennifer finish her condescending explanation about normal wear and tear, allowed her to complete her dismissive characterization of Margaret as a confused old woman, and even permitted her to present her fabricated evidence with the kind of patience that veteran viewers knew meant something explosive was coming. Jennifer was actually smiling as she concluded her defense, confident that her earlier investment in courthouse corruption was about to pay dividends. Asterisk. She glanced again at David Martinez, still expecting some signal that her bribe had secured favorable treatment, still completely oblivious to the fact that every person in that courtroom except her knew exactly what was about to happen. Asterisk. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, steepled her fingers in front of her face, and allowed a moment of silence to stretch across the courtroom like the calm before a hurricane makes landfall. Then she leaned forward and her voice took on the dangerous, quiet tone that anyone familiar with her show recognized as the signal that someone's entire world was about to collapse. Asterisk. She said that before she ruled on the property damage case, there was another matter that needed to be addressed. Something that had occurred earlier that morning that was far more serious than $12,000 in rental property destruction. Asterisk. Jennifer's confident smile flickered for just a moment, a barely perceptible crack in her facade, but she recovered quickly because she still didn't understand the magnitude of what was coming. Asterisk. Judge Judy reached beneath her bench and produced a clear evidence bag containing a white envelope, holding it up so the courtroom cameras could capture it in perfect detail. She stated that at approximately 9:47 a.m. that morning, Jennifer Parker had approached the court clerk's desk and attempted to bribe a court official with $5,000 in cash. Asterisk. The words hung in the air, like a death sentence. Asterisk. Jennifer's face went through a transformation that the cameras captured in excruciating detail. First, confusion, as if she couldn't quite process what she had just heard. Then recognition as her brain caught up with the reality of her situation. Then absolute terror as the full weight of federal felony charges crashed down on her. Carefully constructed world of privilege and purchased immunity, asterisk. The color didn't just drain from her face. It evaporated, leaving her looking like a wax figure melting under hot lights. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out because her vocal cords had apparently forgotten how to function. Her hands, which had been resting confidently on the defendant's table, began to tremble so violently that papers in front of her started to rustle. Judge Judy wasn't finished. She explained in precise legal detail exactly what Jennifer had done. She described how Jennifer had approached David Martinez, initiated a conversation designed to establish rapport, and then produced an envelope containing exactly $5,000 in cash. She noted that the bills were all hundreds, suggesting premeditation. Rather than impulse. She revealed that the entire exchange had been captured on courthouse security cameras, with audio so clear that every word Jennifer whispered could be heard and would be heard by federal prosecutors. Then Judge Judy did something that elevated this moment from courtroom drama to legal legend. She played the audio recording for everyone in the courtroom to hear. Jennifer's voice came through the speakers, artificially friendly at first, then dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she offered the money and suggested that David could make sure Judge Judy saw things properly. The most damning moment came when Jennifer said that $5,000 was nothing to her, and that surely someone on a clerk's salary could use the extra money. That sentence, dripping with contempt for anyone who earned less than she did, captured everything about who Jennifer Parker really was. She wasn't just corrupt. She was contemptuous of the very people whose integrity made the justice system function. Jennifer finally found her voice. And what came out was exactly what Judge Judy and everyone watching expected: denial, excuses, reframing, and ultimately the desperate backpedaling of someone who had finally encountered consequences she couldn't buy her way out of. Jennifer stammered that it wasn't a bribe. It was a gift, a thank you for excellent service. Judge Judy cut her off with surgical precision, asking what service David had provided before Jennifer gave him the envelope. Jennifer was asked why she had told David to make sure her evidence was seen first, why she had said nobody needed to know about the transaction. Her attempts to answer fell apart instantly, turning into fragments of contradictory explanations. She claimed generosity, then misunderstanding, then insisted she hadn't meant anything improper, cycling through excuses like someone drowning and grabbing at anything to stay afloat for another second, asterisk. Judge Judy dismantled every excuse as fast as Jennifer offered it, using her own recorded words to expose each lie with the precision of someone who had spent decades revealing the truth in court, asterisk. Then Judge Judy revealed something far worse. She explained that Jennifer's bribery attempt had triggered an investigation into her legal history, and what they found showed a disturbing pattern. Jennifer Parker had been sued 17 times in the last 8 years, and in 14 of those cases she had somehow received outcomes that didn't match the evidence. 3 cases had been dismissed on suspicious technicalities. 4 settlements were inexplicably low. 7 verdicts contradicted clear photographic and testimonial evidence. Asterisk. Judge Judy explained she had contacted administrators in 3 jurisdictions where Jennifer had faced litigation, and all 3 had begun internal investigations into possible corruption, involving people with access to case files and court schedules. Asterisk. The conclusion was devastating. Jennifer Parker hadn't just tried to bribe one clerk. She had likely been manipulating the justice system for years, leaving behind victims who never received justice because she had learned how to buy favorable outcomes. Asterisk. Margaret Chun sat crying, realizing she had almost become victim number 18, another elderly person ruined by someone who treated the legal system like a game she could rig with money. Asterisk. Judge Judy's ruling on the property damage case was immediate. She awarded Margaret the full $12,347 plus $8,000 in punitive damages for Jennifer's deliberate destruction of property and her complete lack of remorse. Asterisk. But the real punishment was still coming. Asterisk. Judge Judy announced she was referring Jennifer's bribery attempt to the U.S. Attorney's Office for Prosecution. Bribing a court official is a federal felony under Title 18, punishable by up to 15 years in prison and fines worth 3 times the bribe amount. Jennifer's own words on the recording were a confession that made conviction almost guaranteed. Asterisk. Judge Judy then revealed she had already contacted the a state licensing board, and provided evidence of Jennifer's crimes. Her license was immediately suspended, and she would almost certainly lose it permanently. A convicted felon cannot hold a real estate license. Jennifer's career, the source of her money and identity, had ended the moment she pushed that envelope across the desk. Jennifer collapsed into her chair, her entire posture folding in on itself as she began to sob uncontrollably. The arrogance she had carried into the courtroom dissolved into raw panic as she begged for mercy. Claiming she had children, claiming she made a mistake, claiming she didn't understand what she was doing. Judge Judy was unmoved. She pointed out that Jennifer had withdrawn the money in multiple ATM transactions to avoid detection, arrived early to find the right moment, and told David that nobody needed to know. These were the actions of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The tears were not remorse. They were self-pity from someone facing consequences for the first time. The bailiff escorted Jennifer out as she cried, makeup smeared, her expensive outfit wrinkled and wet with tears. Margaret sat stunned, holding her folder. David Martinez was called forward and commended publicly for his integrity, receiving applause from the entire courtroom, a rare moment of emotion in Judge Judy's court. The episode went viral within hours, reaching 17 million views in 48 hours. Jennifer Parker became a symbol of entitled corruption. Her downfall became a cultural moment that reminded millions that justice can't be bought. Law schools examined Judge Judy's handling of the case. Ethics classes studied it as an example of integrity over personal gain. 6 months later, Jennifer pleaded guilty to federal bribery charges and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Her real estate assets were liquidated to repay victims. Her children were placed in her ex-husband's custody. He filed for divorce. The day after the episode aired. Margaret used her judgment to repair her property and became a respected figure in her community. David Martinez continued his work, his integrity proven nationwide, and the message became legendary. In Judge Judy's courtroom, justice is not for sale, and anyone who tries to buy it pays a far higher price than they ever expect. The
courtroom camera captured the exact moment when everything changed. Karen Whitmore, dripping in Cartier diamonds and a Chanel suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, leaned forward in her chair and said the words that would destroy her life forever. "Listen, sweetheart," she began, "you're here to serve justice, which means you serve people like me. You're essentially just a civil servant." The pause that followed wasn't just silence. It was the kind of deadly quiet that happens right before a bomb explodes. Judge Judy Scheindlin's eyes narrowed into slits of pure judicial fury. Her hands, which had been casually resting on her bench, slowly pressed flat against the wood. The audience collectively held their breath, some covering their mouths in shock, others leaning forward to make sure they'd actually heard what they thought they'd heard. Had this privileged socialite really just called America's most feared TV judge a servant on national television in her own courtroom? But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. That insult, that single moment of breathtaking arrogance, was just the beginning. Because what Judge Judy did in the next 47 seconds would become the most viral courtroom moment in internet history, shared over 80 million times across every platform. It was a complete and total destruction, so brutal, so perfectly executed, that it left this, entitled Karen sobbing and begging for mercy, from the same judge she had just disrespected to her face. Before we dive into those devastating 47 seconds that changed everything, smash that like button right now if you're ready to see entitled arrogance meet unstoppable justice. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what happens when someone foolish enough dares to disrespect Judge Judy. Trust me, what you're about to witness will restore your faith in accountability and make you believe that karma is not only real, but it has perfect timing. Karen Whitmore wasn't in Judge Judy's courtroom by accident. This 48-year-old trust fund heiress, who had never worked a real day in her life, was suing her former personal assistant for $15,000 in damages to her luxury Mercedes. According to Karen's lawsuit, Maria Santos, her assistant of 3 years, had supposedly damaged the vehicle's custom leather interior during what Karen described as a fit of rage after being terminated for incompetence. But the truth was far more sinister, and Judge Judy had already figured it out before the hearing even began. Maria hadn't damaged any car. She hadn't been incompetent. She had simply asked for her final paycheck after being fired without cause. Karen, who had spent her entire privileged life using lawyers and lawsuits to bully people into submission, had decided to teach her former assistant a lesson about knowing her place in the social hierarchy. She sat in the plaintiff's chair like she was posing for a magazine photo shoot. Her $8,000 Hermes Birkin bag rested casually on the table in front of her, positioned just right so the cameras would catch the label. Her manicured fingers, adorned with rings that could have paid off Maria's student loans, drummed impatiently on the armrest. She'd already checked her phone twice during the opening proceedings, treating the entire courtroom like an inconvenient appointment before her spa reservation. Judge Judy watched this display with the calm patience of a predator studying prey. She'd seen entitled people before, thousands of them over her 25-year career. But Karen Whitmore was special. This wasn't ordinary arrogance. This was generational wealth mixed with absolute contempt for anyone she considered beneath her station. And Judge Judy had already decided that this woman was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her privileged life. The courtroom was packed with spectators who had no idea they were about to witness television history. Production assistants made their final camera checks. The bailiff took his position, and Karen Whitmore sat there, completely confident that her money, her lawyers, and her status would carry her to victory. She had no idea that the woman sitting behind that bench had spent the previous night researching every detail of her life, uncovering secrets that would turn this simple small claims case into something far more explosive. When Karen delivered that fatal insult, calling Judge Judy essentially a servant, the transformation in the courtroom was instantaneous. Judge Judy didn't yell. She didn't lecture. She simply leaned back in her chair, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That smile, the one regular, viewers knew meant someone was about to be absolutely annihilated, marked the beginning of Karen's downfall. The 47-second countdown to her destruction had officially begun, and nothing in her privileged life had prepared her for what was about to happen next. Karen Elizabeth Whitmore was born into the kind of wealth most people only see in movies. Her grandfather had made his fortune in commercial real estate during the 1950s, building shopping centers across the American South. By the time Karen was born in 1975, the family trust was worth over $40 million, and she had never, not for a single day of her 48 years, experienced a moment without privilege. What normal people call consequences, Karen called inconvenience. Growing up in the gated estates of Greenwich, Connecticut, she learned early that money wasn't just currency. It was power, immunity, the ability to make problems disappear and people obey. Her childhood was built on privilege, private schools where generous donations guaranteed perfect grades, country clubs where staff knew better than to refuse any request, a social circle where everyone understood that the Whitmore name meant you didn't follow the same rules as ordinary people. By her 20s, Karen had perfected the art of wielding wealth like a weapon. She went through personal assistants the way most people go through coffee, firing them on whims, refusing to pay their final wages, and when they dared to push back, burying them under expensive lawyers and frivolous lawsuits. It was a pattern she had repeated so many times, it had become muscle memory. Hire someone desperate enough to tolerate her abuse, work them to exhaustion, find some petty excuse to fire them without proper compensation. Then, if they complained, sue them for more than they could afford to fight. What made Karen particularly dangerous was her complete lack of empathy, combined with an almost sociopathic understanding of how to exploit the legal system. She knew most service workers couldn't afford attorneys. She knew that the mere threat of a lawsuit was often enough to make people walk away from wages they'd rightfully earned. She knew her country club lawyers could drag cases out for years, bankrupting anyone who dared to challenge her. And she absolutely knew that in her social circle, treating the help with casual cruelty wasn't just accepted, it was expected. Maria Santos had entered Karen's employment 3 years earlier with hope and determination. A 29-year-old immigrant from the Philippines, Maria had worked her way through community college while supporting her younger siblings. The job as Karen's personal assistant seemed like an opportunity. Good pay, at least on paper, and a chance to learn how the wealthy operated, maybe even network her way into a better career. Instead, Maria found herself trapped in a nightmare of entitlement and abuse. Karen's idea of a personal assistant fell somewhere between servant and slave. Maria was expected to be available 24 hours a day, responding to texts at 3 in the morning about trivial matters like which shoes Karen should wear to brunch. She was required to run personal errands far beyond her job description, picking up dry cleaning, walking Karen's dogs, even cleaning the house when the regular housekeeper was off. The breaking point came one Tuesday afternoon when Maria politely asked for her paycheck, already 2 weeks late. Karen looked up with genuine confusion, as if the concept of paying staff on time was some bizarre foreign custom she'd never encountered. "You'll get it when I feel like writing the check," Karen said dismissively, not even glancing up from her phone. "If you don't like it, there are 1,000 other girls who'd kill for your job." Maria made the fatal mistake of standing her ground. "Mrs. Whitmore, I have rent due. You agreed to pay me bi-weekly. I need my paycheck today." Her words were polite, professional, and entirely reasonable. But to Karen, they represented the ultimate act of defiance. A staff member, someone she considered fundamentally beneath her, was making demands, acting like an equal, forgetting her place. Karen's response was swift and vicious. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Clean out your things and get out of my house." When Maria asked for her final paycheck and the 2 weeks of back wages she was owed, Karen's eyes went cold. "You'll get nothing. In fact, I'm going to make sure you regret ever speaking to me that way." 3 days later, Maria received notice that she was being sued for $15,000. The lawsuit claimed that during her employment, she had damaged the custom leather interior of Karen's Mercedes S-Class, an act of malicious destruction supposedly committed in a fit of rage upon termination. The claim was entirely fabricated. Maria had never even driven the Mercedes, but Karen knew exactly what she was doing. The lawsuit wasn't about recovering damages. It was about punishment, about teaching Maria, and anyone else who might hear about it, that you don't challenge Karen Whitmore and walk away unscathed. What Karen didn't know was that Maria Santos wasn't like the dozen assistants she'd destroyed before. Maria had kept meticulous records of her employment, text messages showing Karen's abuse, emails documenting late payments, even recordings of conversations, made legally in a one-party consent state. And Maria had done something that terrified people like Karen. She fought back. Unable to afford a private attorney, Maria represented herself in the preliminary hearings, presenting her evidence with quiet dignity. Her documentation was so thorough that the case was escalated beyond small claims court, straight into Judge Judy's jurisdiction. That's when something remarkable happened. Judge Judy's producers, always on the lookout for cases that exposed arrogance and injustice, discovered Maria's story. They reached out, offering to hear the case on national television. To Karen, the offer seemed almost laughable. Appearing on Judge Judy felt beneath her. Reality TV for people who shopped at department stores, not designer boutiques. But her lawyer explained that it would resolve the matter quickly and spare her the drawn-out nuisance of court. Convinced that her polished appearance and high-priced legal representation would easily win over a TV judge, Karen agreed. After all, how could someone like Judge Judy possibly understand the world of people like her? What Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy Schindlin had handled thousands of cases involving exactly that kind of arrogance. Wealthy people convinced that money made them untouchable. And she had already uncovered information about Karen's past that would turn a petty employment dispute into something far darker. Karen Whitmore had built her entire life on the belief that wealth meant immunity, that servants existed to serve, that people like her didn't face consequences. For 48 years, she had bullied, sued, and intimidated her way through life without ever being held accountable. But she'd made a fatal miscalculation. She assumed Judge Judy's courtroom worked like every other space in her privileged world. She was about to learn just how catastrophically wrong that assumption was. Judge Judy Schindlin didn't become America's most feared TV judge by accident. Long before her television fame, she'd already built a reputation in New York's family courts that made seasoned attorneys nervous and entitled litigants crumble. 25 years on the bench had forged her into something people like Karen couldn't comprehend. Someone completely immune to wealth, intimidation, or social status. Her courtroom in Manhattan had been a proving ground for human dysfunction. She'd seen it all. Wealthy parents trying to buy custody. Spoiled trust fund kids believing money made them untouchable. Arrogant spouses convinced their last names entitled them to special treatment. She could spot a liar, a manipulator, or a sociopath within 30 seconds. And Karen Whitmore ticked every box. What made Judge Judy especially dangerous to people like Karen was her absolute indifference to wealth. She'd grown up in Brooklyn, the daughter of a dentist, and clawed her way through law school at a time when women attorneys were still rare. She'd spent years prosecuting cases in family court, facing real victims, real suffering, real injustice. So when someone strutted into her courtroom dripping in luxury brands, using money as a weapon, it didn't impress her. It disgusted her. Her preparation was legendary. While most TV judges skimmed case files, Judge Judy treated every case like a full investigation. She read every document, cross-checked every claim, and demanded background reports that could make even the most confident litigants sweat. Her production team knew the signs. When Judge Judy ordered a deep background check, someone was about to have their life exposed on national television. And for the Karen Whitmore case, she had gone deeper than ever. Something about this lawsuit, a wealthy woman suing her assistant over alleged car damage right after firing her for asking for a paycheck, triggered all of Judy's instincts. It reeked of entitlement and exploitation. The research team's findings were damning. Over the past 15 years, Karen Whitmore had been involved in 23 similar disputes. 23 former employees, assistants, contractors, and service workers all threatened or sued after requesting payment. Most had settled quietly. A few had walked away from the money they were owed, too intimidated to fight back. But this time, Judge Judy found something even worse, evidence that pointed to possible criminal fraud. And she was sitting on it, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate it. So when Karen Whitmore strutted into her courtroom that morning, drenched in designer labels and radiating contempt, Judge Judy watched her with the calm patience of a predator who had already won. She knew exactly how this would end. She knew what evidence would destroy Karen's case. And she knew that the woman about to call her a servant had no idea she was walking straight into a trap. One that had been set long before she ever entered the courtroom. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs of the audience. All rise for the Honorable Judge Judith Scheindlin. Everyone stood immediately, the air thick with anticipation. Respect came automatically in Judge Judy's domain. Everyone stood immediately. Everyone except Karen Whitmore, who took her time gathering her designer bag, checking her reflection in a compact mirror, and finally rising with the casual indifference of someone who believed courtroom protocol was optional for people of her status. Judge Judy noticed. She noticed everything, but she said nothing, simply taking her seat and gesturing for everyone else to do the same. Her eyes locked onto Karen with the intensity of a laser sight, cataloging every detail of the performance about to unfold. Karen smoothed her Chanel jacket, crossed her legs with practiced elegance, and prepared to deliver what she clearly believed would be a masterclass in sophisticated testimony. "Ms. Whitmore," Judge Judy began, her voice carrying its signature no-nonsense authority. "You're suing your former assistant, Maria Santos, for $15,000 in damages to your vehicle. Tell me what happened." It was a simple question, the kind Judge Judy had asked thousands of times before. But Karen's response would immediately reveal exactly what kind of person she was dealing with. Karen didn't just answer the question. She launched into a theatrical performance that would have been rejected by a soap opera for being too over the top. "Your Honor," she began, emphasizing the title with just enough condescension to suggest she was humoring a process she found tedious. "This is really quite simple. I employed Miss Santos as my personal assistant, a position of significant trust and responsibility in my household." The way Karen said, "my household," dripped with the kind of casual superiority that suggested she was describing a small kingdom rather than a suburban Connecticut estate. Unfortunately, Miss Santos proved to be completely incompetent at even the most basic tasks. She was constantly late, frequently made errors, and showed a shocking lack of respect for my time and my property. Judge Judy's eyebrow raised slightly, the first warning sign that experienced viewers recognized immediately. But Karen, completely oblivious to the danger, plowed forward with increasing confidence. When I finally had no choice but to terminate her employment, she became absolutely hysterical. She began screaming at me, making threats, and stormed out of my home in what I can only describe as a rage. Maria Santos sat in the defendant's chair, her hands folded quietly in her lap, her face showing the kind of dignified restraint that came from years of enduring Karen's abuse. She didn't interrupt, didn't roll her eyes, didn't show the anger that would have been completely justified. She simply waited her turn to speak, something Karen had never learned to do in her entire privileged life. "The next day," Karen continued, building to what she clearly believed was her devastating conclusion, "I discovered that the custom leather interior of my Mercedes had been deliberately damaged, scratched, torn, completely ruined. $15,000 in repairs. It was obviously done by Miss Santos as revenge for being fired for her incompetence." Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Whitmore, do you have photographs of this damage? Repair estimates? Any documentation of when this alleged vandalism occurred?" The questions were straightforward, reasonable, the kind of basic evidentiary request that any competent litigant would have anticipated. Karen waved her hand dismissively, as though documentation was something meant for other people, not for someone of her stature. Documentation was something only common people needed to worry about. "My attorney has submitted some paperwork," Karen said dismissively. But really, Your Honor, my word should be sufficient. I'm a respected member of my community. I have absolutely no reason to lie about something like this. The courtroom went quiet. Even Karen's attorney, a tired-looking man in an expensive suit who had clearly learned not to argue with his wealthy clients, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. "Your word should be sufficient," she repeated slowly, letting each word hang in the air like an accusation. Before Karen could respond, Judge Judy turned her attention to Maria. "Miss Santos, tell me your version of events." Her voice, which had been sharp with Karen, softened slightly when addressing the defendant. Maria took a breath and began speaking in a quiet but steady voice. "Your Honor, I worked for Mrs. Whitmore for 3 years. I was never late. I have text messages showing I responded to her requests at all hours, even in the middle of the night. I never damaged her car. I never even drove her car. She fired me because I asked for my paycheck, which was already 2 weeks late. When I requested my final wages, she told me I would get nothing, and that she would make me regret asking." As Maria spoke, her voice began to crack with emotion. "I have a family to support. I worked 60, sometimes 70 hours a week for her. I did everything she asked, even things that weren't in my job description. And when I simply asked to be paid for my work, she destroyed my life with this lawsuit." Karen actually rolled her eyes, a gesture so blatant and disrespectful that several audience members gasped audibly. "Oh, please," Karen muttered loud enough for the courtroom microphones to pick up. "The victim card. How predictable." Judge Judy's gaze snapped back to Karen with the speed of a striking snake. "Excuse me, Miss Whitmore. Did you just mock this woman's testimony in my courtroom?" The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Karen's attorney actually put his head in his hands, recognizing that his client had just made a catastrophic mistake. But Karen, incredibly, doubled down on her disrespect. She let out an exaggerated sigh and said, "Your Honor, I'm simply trying to move this along. We both have better things to do than listen to sob stories from disgruntled employees who don't understand that actions have consequences." The courtroom held its breath. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, that dangerous smile playing at her lips. "Actions have consequences," she repeated softly. "That's very interesting, Ms. Whitmore. Let's explore that concept further, shall we?" Karen, still completely misreading the room, smiled back. She thought she'd just scored a point. She had no idea she'd just handed Judge Judy the perfect opening to begin her systematic destruction. Judge Judy's next question came with surgical precision. "Miss Whitmore, in your 3 years of employing Miss Santos, how did you treat her?" The question seemed innocent enough, almost conversational, but it was a trap carefully set and waiting to be sprung. Karen answered without hesitation, without any awareness of how her words would sound to everyone listening. "I treated her exactly as one should treat staff, firmly, with clear expectations. People in service positions need structure and boundaries, or they start thinking they're equals." The courtroom went silent. Even Karen's attorney closed his eyes, knowing what was coming. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice dangerously quiet. "Equals. You don't see Miss Santos as your equal." Karen actually laughed, a sound so casually cruel it made several audience members visibly recoil. "Equal? Your Honor, let's be realistic. She was my assistant. That's like asking if I see my housekeeper as equal, or my gardener, or any of the help. They provide services. I pay for those services. That's the extent of the relationship." Judge Judy's fingers drummed once on her bench, a gesture her regular viewers knew meant volcanic rage was building beneath her controlled exterior. "So, in your worldview, people who work service jobs are beneath you. Less than you?" "Not less than," Karen said, her tone suggesting she was explaining something obvious to a child. "Just different. There are people who lead and people who serve. That's how society functions. Surely you understand that, Your Honor. The setup was perfect. Judge Judy had guided Karen exactly where she wanted her. Help me understand your philosophy, Miss Whitmore. You believe some people exist to serve others? Karen nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the danger. Exactly. Finally, someone gets it. Look, I don't make the rules of society. I just understand them better than most. People need to know their place. Service workers serve. That's literally in the job title. Judge Judy's voice remained calm, almost academic. And what's my role in this courtroom, Miss Whitmore? Karen smiled, thinking she was about to deliver a clever observation. Well, you're here to serve justice, obviously, which means you serve people who come to your court seeking resolution. You're a civil servant, technically. It's right there in the title. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Karen continued, oblivious to the horror spreading across every face in the courtroom. I mean, let's be honest, Your Honor. We're not that different from each other. You serve the public. Maria served me. It's all the same concept, really. We all have our roles. Then came the moment that would be replayed millions of times. Karen leaned back, completely comfortable, and delivered the final insult with a condescending smile. At the end of the day, sweetheart, you're here to serve justice, which means you serve people like me who actually matter. You're essentially just a civil servant. A well-paid one, I'm sure, but still fundamentally in a service position. The courtroom exploded in gasps. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Karen's attorney looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. But Judge Judy didn't react with anger. Instead, she did something far more terrifying. She smiled. That cold, calculated smile that meant someone had just signed their own death warrant. A servant? Judge Judy said softly, testing the word. You called me a servant. Karen incredibly nodded. I mean, technically, yes. It's not an insult. It's just accurate. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, folding her hands with deliberate calm. Ms. Whitmore, thank you for that clarification. I think it's time we had a very educational conversation about service, respect, and consequences. Her eyes locked onto Karen with predatory intensity. And I have exactly 47 seconds of information that's going to change your entire life. The countdown had begun. Judge Judy's voice dropped to that terrifyingly calm tone that had made grown attorneys weep on national television. Ms. Whitmore, since you believe in people knowing their place, let me educate you about yours. She reached for a thick folder that had been sitting on her bench throughout the entire hearing, the one Karen had barely noticed, the one that contained the research that would destroy her life. Let's start with your car damage claim. You say Miss Santos destroyed the interior of your Mercedes S-Class on the day you fired her, correct? Karen nodded, her confidence still intact but starting to show microscopic cracks. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Judge Judy opened the folder with deliberate slowness. Interesting, because according to Connecticut DMV records, you sold that specific Mercedes 3 months before you fired Miss Santos. The car you're claiming was damaged didn't even belong to you when this alleged vandalism occurred. The color drained from Karen's face. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. There must be some mistake. I have multiple cars. Maybe I mixed up the dates. There's no mistake. Judge Judy cut her off with razor precision. The repair estimate you submitted is for a completely different vehicle that you purchased 2 weeks ago. You fabricated this entire claim. Karen's attorney was frantically flipping through his papers, clearly seeing this information for the first time. Judge Judy wasn't finished. Not even close. But here's what makes your case truly fascinating, Miss Whitmore. This isn't the first time you've pulled this scam. She pulled out a document and held it up for the cameras. 23 times. 23 former employees over 15 years. You have a pattern of firing workers when they request their wages. then suing them for fabricated damages to force them into silence. You've collected over $200,000 in fraudulent settlements from people too poor to fight back. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Karen tried to stand, her voice rising in panic. That's not... You can't just... Those were legitimate. But Judge Judy's voice cut through her protests like a chainsaw through butter. Sit down, Miss Whitmore. I'm not done educating you about your place. Karen collapsed back into her chair, her Chanel suit suddenly looking like a costume, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the terror spreading across her face. Judge Judy continued with merciless precision. Do you trust your family? The one you've been living off your entire life? I had my team look into that too. Turns out, you've been claiming poverty exemptions on property taxes while simultaneously listing luxury assets for insurance purposes. That's called tax fraud, Ms. Whitmore. The IRS tends to take that very seriously. Karen's hands were shaking now, her fingers clutching the edge of the table for support. Her attorney had gone pale, realizing he'd been complicit in representing someone whose criminal activity went far beyond a simple civil dispute. Here's my ruling, Judge Judy declared, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You will pay Miss Santos $15,000, not for car damage that never happened, but for the wages you stole, the emotional distress you caused, and the legal fees you forced her to incur with your fraudulent lawsuit. Karen tried to speak, but Judge Judy raised a hand, silencing her instantly. I'm not finished. I'm forwarding copies of all this evidence to the Connecticut State Attorney General's office for criminal investigation into fraud, tax evasion, and systematic exploitation of workers. I'm also sending copies to the IRS. The 47 seconds were up. Judge Judy had systematically dismantled Karen's case, exposed her criminal pattern, and triggered investigations that would haunt her for years, all with the surgical precision of someone who had been destroying entitled liars for decades. Karen Whitmore had walked into that courtroom calling Judge Judy a servant. She was about to leave it as a criminal defendant facing federal charges, and the transformation from arrogance to devastation was about to reach its spectacular conclusion. Before we see Karen's complete meltdown, smash that like button if you think Judge Judy just delivered the most savage takedown in courtroom history. Drop a comment saying, "Justice served," if you believe Karen got exactly what she deserved. And hit subscribe, because what happens in the next chapter will show you why you never, ever disrespect Judge Judy. Karen's world was collapsing in real time, and the cameras were capturing every second of her destruction. The transformation in Karen Whitmore happened so fast, it was almost surreal. The confident socialite who had strutted into the courtroom draped in designer labels was gone, replaced by a trembling, desperate woman whose carefully constructed facade was... Karen's composure was crumbling in real time on national television. "Wait," Karen stammered, her voice cracking as she half rose from her chair. "Wait, Your Honor, please. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything." Her hands reached out toward Judge Judy in a gesture of pleading that would have been unthinkable just minutes earlier. Judge Judy's response was colder than a winter morgue. "Explain? You want to explain how you accidentally filed 23 fraudulent lawsuits? How you accidentally committed tax fraud? How do you accidentally call me a servant in my own courtroom?" Each question landed like a physical blow. Karen's perfectly styled hair was coming undone as she ran, shaking hands through it repeatedly. The diamond rings that had been positioned so carefully for the cameras now seemed like evidence of the wealth she'd accumulated through exploitation. "I didn't mean the servant thing. That came out wrong. I was just trying to make a point. Please, Your Honor, I have so much respect for you." "Respect?" Judge Judy's laugh was utterly devoid of humor. "You showed me exactly how much respect you have. You treated this courtroom like your country club. You treated Miss Santos like your property. and you treated justice like something you could buy with your family's money. The tears started then, genuine and unstoppable. Karen's makeup began running in dark streaks down her cheeks as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a tsunami. "Please," she sobbed, her voice now completely stripped of its earlier arrogance. "Please don't do this. I'll pay Maria whatever she wants. I'll drop the lawsuit. Just please don't send those files to the Attorney General." The desperation in her voice was absolute. This was the same woman who had laughed at Maria's testimony 20 minutes earlier, now reduced to begging for mercy from both the judge she'd insulted and the assistant she'd tried to destroy. Judge Judy watched this meltdown with detached professional interest. "Miss Whitmore, you had every opportunity to treat people with dignity. You had every chance to pay your employees fairly. You chose cruelty. You chose exploitation. You chose to use the legal system as a weapon against people who couldn't defend themselves." Karen was openly weeping now, her sobs echoing through the silent courtroom. Her attorney sat frozen, knowing there was nothing he could say or do to salvage this disaster. The audience watched with a mixture of satisfaction and shock, witnessing the complete destruction of someone who had believed herself untouchable. "The judgment stands," Judge Judy declared with finality. $15,000 to Miss Santos. Case dismissed. The gavel came down with the sound of a cell door slamming shut. Karen collapsed forward onto the table, her body shaking with sobs. The bailiff approached to escort her out, but she could barely stand. The woman who had called Judge Judy a servant was now being physically supported as she stumbled toward the exit, her cries of, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," trailing behind her like ghosts. Maria Santos sat quietly, tears of relief streaming down her face. 3 years of abuse, months of legal harassment, and countless sleepless nights had finally resulted in justice. Judge Judy nodded at her with something that might have been respect, a silent acknowledgement between two women who understood that sometimes the law actually works the way it's supposed to. Within 2 hours of the episode airing, Karen Whitmore's courtroom destruction had become the most viral video on the internet. The clip of her calling Judge Judy a servant, followed by her complete emotional breakdown, spread across Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube like wildfire. By midnight, it had been viewed over 15 million times. By the end of the week, that number had exploded to over 80 million views across all platforms. The hashtag #JoterKarenServantMoment trended worldwide for 3 consecutive days. Social media users created memes, reaction videos, and compilations of Karen's facial expressions as her world collapsed. The moment when she confidently said, "You're essentially just a civil servant," became the most replayed 5 seconds of courtroom television in history. Her transition from smug arrogance to sobbing desperation was analyzed, dissected, and celebrated by millions of people who had their own stories of dealing with entitled employers and abusive bosses. But the consequences for Karen Whitmore went far beyond internet infamy. Her lifestyle brand, Whitmore Refined Living, which sold overpriced home goods and etiquette courses to wealthy suburban women, imploded within 48 hours. Major retailers dropped her product line. Her book deal for Grace Under Pressure, A Modern Woman's Guide to Elegance, was cancelled. Sponsors fled so fast, they left scorch marks. The Connecticut State Attorney General's office moved with surprising speed. Within a week, Karen was formally charged with 15 counts of fraud, 8 counts of tax evasion, and multiple counts of filing false legal claims. The evidence Judge Judy had compiled became the foundation of a criminal case that prosecutors called it one of the most clear-cut examples of systematic exploitation they had ever seen. The IRS audit that followed was equally devastating. Karen's claims of poverty exemptions while maintaining luxury assets resulted in criminal tax charges and a demand for over $400,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. Her family trust, which she had relied on her entire life, was frozen pending resolution of the criminal charges. Perhaps most dramatically, 12 of Karen's 23 previous victims came forward after seeing the Judge Judy episode. They formed a class action lawsuit seeking to recover the money Karen had extorted from them through fraudulent legal claims. Their combined lawsuit sought over $300,000 in damages, and with Judge Judy's research as evidence, their case was ironclad. Karen's social circle, the country club friends who had enabled and encouraged her entitled behavior for decades, abandoned her with remarkable speed. Women who had laughed at her stories of putting staff in their place suddenly claimed they had always found her behavior troubling. The country club quietly revoked her membership. Former friends deleted photos with her from social media and issued public statements distancing themselves from her actions. Maria Santos, meanwhile, became an unexpected advocate for workers' rights. She was invited to speak at labor organization events, appeared on news programs discussing employer abuse, and eventually started a nonprofit called the Dignity Project, which provided legal resources to service workers facing exploitation from wealthy employers. Her GoFundMe started to help with legal fees, raised over $200,000 from supporters inspired by her courage. Judge Judy's handling of the case became legendary in legal circles. Law professors used the footage to teach students about the importance of thorough case preparation and the dangers of allowing wealth to influence legal proceedings. The episode was analyzed in legal. Journals discussed it in courtroom ethics courses and held it up as an example of how justice should work when judges refuse to be intimidated by money or status. 6 months after her humiliation on national television, Karen Whitmore's life bore no resemblance to the privileged existence she had enjoyed before calling Judge Judy a servant. She had sold her Connecticut estate to pay legal fees. Her Mercedes collection was liquidated to cover restitution payments. She was facing a potential 10-year prison sentence if convicted on all charges. The woman who had spent 48 years believing wealth made her immune to consequences had learned the hardest lesson of her life. CT. The cultural impact of Karen's destruction extended far beyond her personal downfall. The case sparked national conversations about wealth inequality, the exploitation of service workers, and the ways wealthy people weaponize the legal system against those who can't afford to fight back. News outlets ran investigative pieces about similar patterns of abuse. Several states introduced legislation to penalize employers who filed fraudulent lawsuits against workers requesting legally owed wages. Support groups formed online where former personal assistants, housekeepers, and service workers shared their own stories of abuse from wealthy employers. The solidarity and validation these workers found in each other's experiences led to increased reporting of labor violations and a measurable rise in workers standing up for their rights. Judge Judy herself addressed the case in a later interview, saying simply, "Respect isn't about money or status. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person you encounter." Karen Whitmore learned that lesson the hard way, and I have zero sympathy for her situation. She created it herself through years of cruelty and exploitation. The episode became Judge Judy's most watched of all time, introducing a new generation to her brand of no-nonsense justice. Viewership for her show increased by 30% in the months following the Karen Whitmore case, as audiences craved more examples of entitled people facing real consequences. For Maria Santos, the vindication was profound but bittersweet. "I didn't want to become famous," she said in an interview 6 months later. "I just wanted to be paid for my work and treated like a human being. But if my experience helps even one person stand up to an abusive employer, then everything I went through was worth it." The lesson from Karen Whitmore's spectacular downfall was crystal clear. respect isn't optional. Consequences are real, and calling Judge Judy a servant is possibly the worst decision anyone can make on national television. Karen had spent her entire life believing that wealth and status put her above accountability. In 47 devastating seconds, Judge Judy had proven that belief catastrophically wrong. If you loved watching entitled Karen Get the Justice She Deserved, smash that like button right now. Comment respect matters. If you believe everyone, regardless of their job, deserves to be treated with dignity, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we've got more incredible courtroom moments where karma catches up with people who think they're above the law. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that arrogance always meets accountability eventually. And remember, in Judge Judy's world and in life, treating people like servants will get you treated like a criminal. Karen Whitmore learned that lesson in the most public and humiliating way possible, and her destruction will be remembered as one of the greatest moments of courtroom justice ever captured on camera. Justice wasn't just served. It was delivered with the precision of a master and the impact of a meteor. And Karen Whitmore will spend the rest of her life knowing that the moment she called Judge Judy a servant was the moment her entire world came crashing down.